We are dead.
Whoever fights with monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back into you. Friedrich Nietzsche. Sometimes when you look deep into the woods, they look back. Cisco Murdoch. The Strange Case of Cabin 22, The Final Stand. Tater flew like the wind, his faded turquoise golf cart struggling uphill. It was a slow-blowing wind at best, but it was steady. The sound of laughter from the unseen child had sent his brain into overload. He was scared, he was shaken, and he was so sorry. Everything that was happening to him today was setting his mind in its own whirlwind, and he stayed on course toward the cabins, the lodge, and hopefully people who were his true friends. It was dark, and although the trail was well known, its trees and low shadows haunted Tater along his way. Low-hanging branches seemed like hands reaching for him, to hold him back somehow. He knew there was danger in here, in these woods. He could feel it. Just like he knew the land behind the junkyard was bad, real bad. Even the air back there seemed different and made it harder to breathe. He hated that old playground in the woods beyond. People went missing back there, and his dad had told him never to go back there. Tater never did. Taking Jeb and dropping him off on that trail today was as close as he had been in 10 years or more. "Animals don't even like it there," his dad had said once. "If'n a squirrel or deer won't live on a patch of ground, well, then it ain't fit for humans neither. Keep that in your head, Tater. Your ma and I want you safe." And Tater remembered. The big man thought sure that whatever was on that land tried to get him tonight. His ma had once said, "Bad brings bad, good brings good. Plain and simple, Taterbug." Tater thought hard on his deception to the McGees. He thought hard as his golf cart fought the road up the cabins. He thought hard on his big lie, and that bad brought bad. Had he brought the bad on himself? Revenge, anger, hate, lying, making trouble, even possibly being friends with Jeb and Skeet could be bad. Jeb didn't seem as mean-spirited as Skeet was. Skeet scared Tater, and he shuddered now thinking how Skeet had laughed when they found old Bob Olson in the river, dead and alone. Bob was Tater's good friend, always kind, patient, taught him a lot about fishing, stories about when his dad was young, about dreams he had had for the land and caring for keeping it unspoiled, natural, free for everyone to enjoy. Taught him quite a bit about turning a wrench, too, and how to listen to an engine and let it tell you what it needs to fix it. Yup, Bob was a good man. Skeet broke the news to him and Jeb that day when they were working on that pretty Mustang at the garage. Tater was happy that day till old Skeet stumbled in, laughing and holding his belly like the laughter would pop right out through there if he didn't hold tight. What did he say? Tater tried to recall now, holding the wheel tight to his golf cart as he puttered up the dirt-banked road. That was it, Tater said this part out loud, as he smacked that wheel now as like an exclamation point to his thoughts. Skeet's voice and crackling laugh came clear to his mind. That old coot should have watched his step. Them rocks are might slippery on that river bank. Should have known better, old coot. Been more careful. Why, he must have knocked himself silly on one. Must have busted his head open like a July watermelon, he did. That'd explain why there was so much blood running down the river. Yup, clean down to the Little Falls turn. That's what he said that night in the garage to Jeb. Tater had been sad and was trying not to cry in front of those boys. He had sulked off to the old cot in the back room where Jeb sleeps and did his best to hold back tears when Skeet had let him know how old Bob, his good friend, had been found that day. Jeb asked him if he had been there when they found him. Jeb was worried people had seen Skeet up there. "No," Skeet had answered. "I ain't been up there for a while, but I know the place. So do you, Jeb. Heard tell they found him there is all. No one's seen me round that trail, Jeb. I made sure of it. You can count on me. You can count on me." Tater was scared and sad big time that day. He was scared now, too. Could be why he was driven back hard on his memory now. But now a different kind of memory pushed clear in his mind. Right up to the front where he could see it real good. Skeet laughed hard at his friend Bob, and that wasn't nice at all, Tater thought. And the way he described the blood of his friend running clear down the river to that Little Falls turn, it was quite a ways from where they found Bob. How'd he know about the blood? It was clear a month Bob was missing, and if Skeet hadn't been there, how'd he know? Tater slapped both hands against the cart's wheel now and reared back and bumped his head on its low roof. He was madder than scared now. He'd have to ask Jeb about this, he thought to himself now, the bang on his head clearing his mind to the task at hand. Getting the hell right out of here was more important now, and being friends with the likes of Skeet could have brought trouble on him, could have brought bad to bad. His own deeds could have brought it too. He'd fix that right as soon as he could, as soon as he got to the McGee's. That land could have sent something bad to get him. Could it have made him break down right there by the fence? Could it do such a thing? He heard that laughter. He felt the evil on the wind. Is something like that possible? Tater wondered. He didn't know how, but he was sure he had gas plenty this morning. Running out right there by the fence line of that old playground didn't make any sense, and he hoped he'd have enough gas to get him home. If not, he would run, he thought. Just run. He heard a loud scream from behind him, coming from down the trail, from where he had just left. It sounded loud but muffled. And then a howl that he thought had to be from a huge wolf. There was no way he would be going back to see what made that sound. "No way, no how," the big man said out loud. "I had enough today. Just help me home, Lord. Just get me home. I'll tell it all I will, I promise. Just get me home." His prayer carried off on the wake of his cart, giving all she had. The big man sputtered up the dark trail toward home, and unknown to Tater, further away from where his friend Jeb was taking his very last breath. Those around the fire decided it was for sure going to be a long night. The howls and screams coming from down the mountain toward the garage and RV park chilled them to the bone. Only 4 campers were down there, Chuck remembered. 3 of them were regulars. 1 weekender. No kids, he thought to himself, worried. He'd get Bill Cook and his men to come check on them when they got this all more sorted. Those howls and screams still chilled him. Chuck McGee knew that although they were chilling and unexplained so far, the wailing coming from the heavy woods higher up the trail from them was the most troubling ones. May moved in closer to Chuck and added her thoughts to his like she could read his mind. "Charles, they haven't been this vocal in quite a while. I can tell you I don't like the feeling it's given me. I left out 2 of my finest apple and peach pies today on that Given Rock out back. They lay there untouched still. That never happens. The female always comes by and takes those. Usually leaves a little something behind, too, like that time she left that pretty root that looked like a walking stick, or that black shiny rock that looked like an obsidian. Never happens. Those pies would sit out there all day on that rock, just never, Charles." Chuck nodded in agreement with his wife of 40-plus years. They indeed could be close to being able to read each other's minds by now, the way most couples married for that long could do. "You read my thoughts, May," Chuck stated. "The Squatch is definitely unsettled tonight. It sure doesn't like something going on down there." He gestured down the dirt trail that led past Perkins' garage, the dead children's playground, and the few homes along the way down to the highway at the base of Montesano Mountain. That long, winding road that led to civilization and any help they may need tonight. Dave overheard some of this conversation. He hadn't known the McGees long, but their opening up like this after seeming to be one of the no-nonsense kind of people on his arrival was throwing Dave more than the information he was overhearing. Dave ran a hand over his mouth and chin, felt the bit of growth there from his no-shave vacation, and now looked at Joe Parker, who he had grown to trust this long day of events. "Are you seriously telling me we're talking about a Bigfoot here? I mean, really, Joe. A damn Bigfoot?" Joe Parker wiped a palm down his face, too, as if to think on this one a second, slowly nodded, and added, "Yes, Dave, I think we are." He looked down at the ground a moment like he could find his words there, and he tagged this last bit on. "I can't explain it, Dave, but I saw one about 2 years ago, up here. I'd like to say I was scared, because I think that would make it sound saner in a way. But I wasn't. I actually felt sorry for the creature, like it was the one that was scared." Dave tried hard to take all this in. Who was he to discount anything at this point, he thought to himself, and he listened. Joe continued. "I was on a search for a missing hiker out here, there in the deeper woods past the trails. I have been told by Jake the shaman that there are portals out there too. I know, I sound crazy, but listen. He says some split open, quite like the atmosphere just opens, like a door, and others, he says, almost seem like a watery mirror. I didn't believe it at all, just like you now, till one day, Bubba and I and a couple of the boys from the station were looking for a lost hiker and his dog. I took to going off the main trail and was searching out where a sinkhole had opened. Just a fall in the ground, really. Dirt settling happens all the time here, but people can fall in 'em quick. No tell how deep it will be either. So I was headed that way, and the air changed. It seemed like all the sound just stopped." Joe looked as if he was talking to nothing and everything at once as he stared ahead and into the woods, and he continued. "The birds stopped singing. Even my steps in the leaves and on sticks seemed to be muffled somehow, like the sound was heavy and just fell instead of ringing out like normal. I kept walking forward, and I noticed in front of me was a place just above the ground and a bit taller than me that looked different somehow, like you were looking down through the surface of a pool down to the bottom. I took one step, and my foot went through it. It just disappeared. Dave, it just disappeared. I quickly pulled it back, but my wondering got ahead of me, and I put my foot in it again, and it did the same, just disappeared. I couldn't help myself and slowly stuck my hand in, and yes, it disappeared too, right up to my elbow. I moved it around, and it felt the same through there, a little colder, but the same really. I got scared something might grab it, so I quickly pulled it out and backed away from it fast. It shook me for sure, but I continued the search in another area. I held that information till I could see Jake. He explained it was a portal into another dimension. I was shocked, yes, but I saw it, Dave. I saw it. I don't pretend to understand it at all. Jake said things come and go through them, and have since time began. Anytime someone goes missing up here, I have to wonder if they stumbled into one of those portal things and just continued their life in another place, not knowing where they were or how to get back. Like all those people missing in national parks you hear about lately. There have been so many that left without a trace. It's possible. Joe turned his head and looked at Dave with eyes searching for some understanding. Jake says there are beings that use those to come here, hunt food, help other creatures here, and go on back to their dimension. Again, like it was us, going to a Walmart. Seems some of these kinds of mirror-like portals just pop up for a bit and then disappear and come out somewhere else. So, my friend, two things. One, I could never find that place where my foot went through again. And two, I discount nothing. My idea of reality has shifted quite a bit since I have become friends with these folks in this beautiful land up here. Joe looked toward the darkness of the woods, into the shadow of the trees backed by moonlight. Those Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you call them, they're out there, Dave. And it was theirs before we got here. Man, I think it just may be theirs long after we're gone. He made a thoughtful pause. Dave somehow understood. Dave was looking into the vastness of the wooded landscape now, too. My God, what are we in the middle of here, Dave thought. Chuck chimed in as he stepped next to the two men. We got ourselves a war going on around us tonight, and the only thing we can do is stay out of the way and keep these people in the cabin safe tonight. I'm grateful you boys are here. If you have any more firepower back at your cabins, I'd say now's a good time to fetch 'em up. I'm calling Sheriff Cook and telling him what we heard. Those screams were not good. And I'll call on the radio to the boys I have on wheels out there in the trails. And I'll tell them to keep their heads up and keep us posted. We'll hold fort here at the fire and try to get a jump on anything that might come out of the woods. We will have a mostly clear view to protect the road to the cabins and here on the lodge. Cabins are set high on a cliff outlook. I believe whatever is down that road will come up this way. I have a shotgun and some ammo back at my cabin, Dave said. Chuck nodded. Good. Both you men go get anything you brought, Deputy, and if you wouldn't mind, give a look around the other cabins as you go. Stay close. Don't split up, and we will all meet back here. Joe Parker and Dave Weaver agreed. Rage sat among them, listening intently, and the three were now a team of sorts. They also agreed with Chuck on all aspects of how tonight may go. Keep this to yourself, though, boys. I do not want to alert the campers unless it is necessary. Having panicky people running every which way won't help matters any. Dave couldn't help but add this too in a whisper of disbelief. Chuck, a Bigfoot? Really? His face almost pleaded with the older man to say it was all a joke of some kind. He did not get his wish. Chuck McGee was worried bringing more people into the secrets of this mountain, but circumstances were as they were. So he just took off his hat, looked down at his well-worn brown boot, kicked a bit at the dirt, and looked back at Dave and Joe. "Well, more things in heaven and earth, boys." Placed his hat back on his head and added, "Now go get those firearms and be mindful and hurry." Joe and Dave, and of course Rage, headed down the dirt road toward both their cabins to retrieve their weapons, some warmer gear, and to have a look around. Chuck watched them walk up the trail and looked deep into the woodline that bookended their walk, looked up to the starry night sky and asked no one, and everyone at once in a low whisper, "Just hold it off a bit if you can, and be with us when it comes." An owl answered back. "Who? Who?" "Who indeed," Chuck whispered back, and shotgun in hand, walked back to the fire. Chuck looked at George, Greta, and May in the campfire light, and winced at how close they were to the tree line. He darted his eyes over the branches lit by the moon, and between the trees that stood like soldiers in the night. Where would it come from, he thought to himself, the trouble? Would it be coming from above? At ground level? All at once? Or in waves? He had no idea. He heard the wailing of the Squatch's conversation from higher up the peak, and he knew they had an idea, and he knew who they might be calling to help. This gave him a shudder as he got closer to his friend. He put on a brave face as they turned to him, and he offered a little comfort. "One step at a time, we will take it as it comes. We will make 2 posts, one here at the fire. It's a good observation point. With the cliff beyond that rock wall, there's only one blind spot off the store's side. You ladies post in the lodge for now. I will go get Tom to sit guard with you. Joe and Dave will stay out here with me and George. Hope I can get the sheriff to come too. Rage will be an added benefit to the group. He will know when something's coming way before we do." He nodded at George, and George tipped his head in agreement, and Chuck added, "No one separates more than that, till we know what we have here. May, we are going to need some strong black coffee, and it's time." Chuck winked at May, and May smiled back and nodded. "Come on, Greta, let's check those doors and start that coffee." The ladies went back in together through the back door, and May locked and checked it twice. "First things first, Greta," May said as she motioned Greta to follow her. Greta followed May into Charles McGee's office and walked up to a large antique grandfather clock. May noticed it displayed the wrong time as May pulled on the door on the front of the handsome piece and wondered if she was going to reset it or something similar. This was Charles's mama's clock. It was her mom's before that, May explained. She no longer keeps good time, but she keeps good secrets. May reached in and pulled out a Stoger 12-gauge coach gun, and then another, one in a stained brown wood grain. She handed to Greta. "Here you go, hon. It's time, Chuck says." And she patted the stock of the black one with a buckshot ammo holder, and it was packed full. "This one is mine. We're going to keep these close tonight. Those times you shot cans with your daddy when you were a girl may come in handy tonight." May smiled and reached down into the deep part of the grandfather clock and got out an extra box of ammo. Greta smiled and added, "It has been a while for sure, May, but if what we heard howling comes prowling around, I will remember right quick." May smiled and patted her friend's arm. "That's a girl. Now to the coffee." As Joe, Dave, and Rage walked past the cabins, they kept an eye out for sure. The shadows played in the trees, and darkness was not giving up her secrets easily. They walked on to Dave's cabin first, and on the porch of cabin number 20 were the smiling, glowing faces of the jack-o'-lanterns they saw the young girl carving earlier. The flickering light from a fireplace danced in the cabin windows, and Dave thought it looked warm and safe inside, and he hoped the young kids were playing cards, or Uno, or poker for all he cared, as long as all was well. Inside that very cabin, there was a bit more than a card game going on. "Billy Ray, I think you should have brought more batteries. Last time, they drained so fast we lost the best recordings when Aunt Rose got that poor ghost guy to answer her." Billy Ray, who now preferred to be called Will in his late teens, but let his sister Carney get away with the Billy Ray she had always called him, smiled now. "I did. I have more in the car, Carney. I'm always thinking ahead. I don't want to bring 'em in till I need them, or they might get drained too." "Oh," Carney smiled back. "Good call." She wrinkled her nose and popped her gum, like an exclamation point. Pop! Carney was excited. Since the last time they were here on the mountain, she and her family had researched the history around the area for days, searching libraries, city hall records, the internet, and more. The research included strange things, like the disappearances of hunters and hikers through the years, and odd things going on in the woods, and recently around the cabins. The dead children's playground interested her the most, though. The stories of strange things happening there were many. Those poor kids, dead for how long, that swung on the swings in the dark of night, just gave her shudders. Why would they stay? Maybe they were just having fun, sure, coming back to a place they were familiar with. It was a solid theory. But that theory didn't sit well with her somehow, and she made it her business to find out more on the subject. They found out a few things about the start of the cabin campsite, more on the caves and land and the indigenous people who came before. There was a legend she was intrigued by, something about the area of the land past that site. It seemed even animals didn't want to live there, and only certain trees would grow there too. She had read some natives said it was dead earth, and people should not go there, live there, or have anything to do with it at all. There were tales of odd animals being seen around here, and yes, there were stories of Bigfoot sightings, odd light anomalies, even a UFO sighting by a man hunting up here in the 1940s. One news clipping said he went home screaming that the war was starting up again and the enemy was invading. Sounded funny when you read it, but her Uncle Clay said those times during the war were pretty cringy for people to live through here, and that the actual enemy got a lot closer in places like California and the East Coast too than the government ever admitted. So why not? The young girl shrugged. Uncle Clay had also added another article on the incident. It stated that that same night many people in this area reported their cars just stopping in the road. Their batteries drained, just like Billy Ray's camera batteries. Radios in homes in the area either went out or changed stations back and forth. People called in to their local radio station and reported animals acting funny, breaking out of their pens and barns, that they saw odd lights in the sky that made a whirring noise that made their horses go nuts. A lady had called in and said her cake fell And that never happened to her. Carney laughed at this now, just like she had when her uncle had read it the first time. She didn't get it completely, but it sounded funny just the same. People saw all these odd lights in the sky, and those that had electricity out here lost it for days. No explanation was given in the article. They found other things too, and they wanted to present them to the owners, the McGees, let them know things that they had found out, but they needed more. Something that tied these events into the history, maybe. Uncle Clay told her that people sometimes need to see a lot of evidence before believing a smidgen of it. She thought this was true, and planned on getting more tonight if she could. But that playground, though, she thought again and shuddered a bit. It just had an energy that seemed to cry out for help. Her aunt had told her to be cautious of that, because something there made her feel like it was a trap of some sort. Aunt Rose, who was a great teacher, as well as a wonderful medium, had helped Carney better understand her own gifts, and Carney's was taking her to new levels every day. Uncle Clay had his own abilities too, and was one heck of an historian, and a good analytical thinker. And last but not least, her lanky brother rounded off the little team of sorts with his tech knowledge, and was quite the photographer. Billy Ray was not only an awesome photographer, but was learning about the equipment that could help them better understand the things going on in an investigation they were on, and got some great evidence last time they were here. If the darn batteries had not all gone dead so fast, they could have gotten more to show the owners. "Carney, come sit, girl. We have to do our meditation and protections." Aunt Rose called to her niece from the little table they had set up in the room. "And spit out that gum, young lady. We have work to do." She added a smile to this. Carney just loved her aunt, and she had been wonderful to her since her parents had passed on years ago. Aunt Rose sat with her hands on the table, palms up, her lettered cloth and pendulum lit with a single white candle burning in front of her. Uncle Clay sat across from her in the same manner, and now spoke in a low voice to his wife. "I hope that poor man gets through again. I truly feel for him, Rose." Rose smiled. "Me too, Clay. And that young girl, too. There's something strange going on here. The energy has many layers. Perhaps we can get to the bottom of it tonight." Clay agreed with a nod and closed his eyes again, saying his silent prayers for what Rose called good vibes and protections. Will finished his setup as the other three sat around the table saying their opening prayers, and turned off the overhead lights. The room fell to dancing flames of the fireplace and the single candle's glow. "George," Chuck called over to his friend, "this isn't going to be a good night. I can feel it in my bones. We need to keep everyone close. Let's run in the store, help Tom to lock up the shop, and let him know we could use his help to cover the lodge inside." "He's one heck of a shot, as I recall," George remembered, "from that time we all were up the trail. Got that poacher's hand just right. Knocked the gun right out of it. Saved that black bear cub. That was something to see. One heck of a shot." "Sure was, George. He's a good man. I got to get Sheriff Cook and the boys back up here, too. Gonna be a hell of a night, George." George agreed, and they headed on their way. Tom, being a regular up here, didn't need a lot of explanation. He helped the men lock up the little general store and reached in deep on a shelf, pulled out a shotgun, checked it, and handed it to George. Grabbed the .357 Chuck had in the cubbyhole by the register. Easing into a calm protective mode, Tom tucked the revolver into his waistband of his faded jeans, pulled his shirt tail over it. "I just bet May has some good pie in that kitchen of hers." He smiled at Chuck. "I think I'll go check and tell a story or two. Sounds good, Chuck smiled back. Keep a good eye out and save us a piece for when this is all over. Tom nodded and headed toward the lodge office. Chuck and George headed back toward the fire to keep a lookout there. Tater rounded the corner and met the men as they made their way back from the little general store. His golf cart kicked up dust as he did, and he was so shook up he almost hit George. "Mr. McGee! Mr. McGee!" Tater almost fell getting out on his feet. Oh my God, it was terrible. The screaming. Did you hear it? Tater was shook for sure, and the men could see it aplenty. "Are you all right, Tater? Were you there? What happened?" Chuck asked. Tater spoke in jumbled sentences all at once. I heard her laughing at the playground. Jeb didn't show up. Something big is growling down at the garage. Oh, I'm so sorry." Tater just fell apart right there. George and Chuck did their best to unravel the words. George stepped up to grab the big man's arm. He was sure he was going to faint. "Come sit down before you fall, Tater." The men walked him to the fire and sat him down in Chuck's deluxe camper's chair. Chuck asked him to catch his breath and then explain what he saw. Tater wipes dirty tears away from his eyes as he sobs out how sorry he was. "I gotta tell it. It was my fault." Chuck was confused. "Tater, I'm sure we can help if you just tell us. What did you see down there?" Tater explained about Jeb never coming back for a big job they had. Having to stay down there after dark, getting stuck. The swings and that merry-go-round all started going on their own. I heard kids laughing. Then on the way up, hear screaming and a big growling, howling sound. "Yes, Tater, we heard that howling too, and the scream. I didn't hear any kids, though." George tried to comfort the big man. "It's my fault. I lied to Mr. McGee. I was so mad, jealous. I just wanted to scare some folk so they wouldn't stay so much. Thought I could buy a piece of the cabins from you. If this place lost money, you'd want to sell it. I'm so sorry. It's my fault. Now it's after me." Chuck was confused now, but good. "Buy a piece of the cabins? Tater, I don't understand." Tater wipes more tears and stands up. "Look." He marched over to the golf cart, lifted the back trunk, and pulled out a large, black, gooey-looking thing. He carried it over toward George and Chuck and threw it to the ground. "It was me. It was me scaring those people. I did it." On the ground, before Chuck and George, was what looked to Chuck like the largest ghillie suit he'd ever seen, soaked black with some kind of muck. George's eyes got wide, and he reached out and touched the garment, rubbed it with his fingers, sniffed the blackness there, and said, "Motor oil. Dirty motor oil." Chuck's eyes widened now. "Motor oil?" Tater tried to explain. "I'm sorry for scaring those people. I know. Sobs. I was so mad at my daddy not making me part of the partners here. He said I was dumb and trusted you." Sobbed some more. I just wanted to slow down business and maybe buy some of it offen you. You're going to be so mad. I'm so sorry. Chuck looked at George and smiled. Tater, I can't say that I understand all this, but I think it's best we get you inside. Let's go see May and get some pie. Try and sort this out a bit later. What do you say? Tater nodded, and they all went into the lodge, explained what they could to May and Greta, and Chuck left the others consoling Tater in the kitchen, and made his way to his office to call the sheriff. Deep in the woods, the pack waited for their leader. One of them was badly burned and sat licking at its scorched fur and burning skin. The other sat near the food provided by their wise one and looked into the darkness. When the leader emerged through the trees, he stood before his injured friend and found its eyes with his own. He touched at the burned place along its legs. He could still hunt. Of use, he thought. If not, he would have to take him. If he was weak. He touched the wounded one's head and thought to take him now. Less to feed, less to care for. He could hear the wails of the wood beast higher up this mountain. He knew they would fight for their territory too. Oh, they would fight. How many intruders were among them? They had the fierce weapons, ones that blew fire and hot metal. No. He would spare this one for now, if for nothing else, as bait to draw one of his foe to its end. He ran his claws down his face gently, as he had done to the intruder, and turned away for now. The other let out a slow howl into the night, as if in agreement, and the three beasts walked together into the thickness of the woods, dragging the headless body of Jebediah Perkins with them. Deputy Joe Parker grabbed his radio and extra ammo. While he was there, he tried to get through to Nan at dispatch, but the signal was too weak. He hoped Chuck had gotten through on the landline. The men then walked over to Dave's cabin and got his shotgun and a warmer coat. "I'm grabbing a couple of waters. Anything else you can think of, Joe?" Joe Perkins was looking at the tackle box again, in remembrance of earlier that day, and a shudder ran down his spine. "A bit of luck, I'd say." Dave agreed and grabbed a can of Rage's food and stuck it in a pocket of his jacket, thinking this could well be a long night. "Let's roll, then." Tater sat at May's kitchen table. He was settling down a bit. Greta patted his hand as he recalled the playground and the unexplained movement of the playground's equipment that scared him so. It was hard enough for Tater to understand things that made some sense to him. Things of the bizarre nature and unexplained were a bit tougher on him. "Some things we just can't explain, Tater." Greta tried to console him. "I can tell you from my experience, I have seen such things too. You are not alone in this." May sat down and slid a piece of apple pie and a glass of milk in front of Tater. "It's not cherry pie, Tater Daniels, but it's good comfort food just the same." May smiled at him, and Tater just felt worse. "I don't deserve it, Mrs. McGee. I'm a liar and a bad friend." He sniffled like a small child who got caught cheating on a test. George leaned in and spoke softly to the shaking man. "Can you tell us what you meant about scaring people here, Tater?" George was careful and kind. "I did it. I soaked that suit I got from Donnie Markham in the oil from the changes I did at the garage. He had it for hunting. It's a sniper's uniform." George nodded to Tom as if they both understood at the same time. Tom nodded back in agreement and listened in, and felt so bad for this big man that in so many ways was still so childlike. "Yes, a ghillie suit. Go on," George said. Tater took a forkful of pie and seemed to think. "Yes, that's it. It was big enough for me, so I thought it up. There's those stories about people seeing a black thing run through the wood. Word tells it, they call it a shadow person. And then there's that story of that black thing that goes haunting the riverbank sometimes. So I got to thinking, and I got the idea. I tried to scare 'em in the shower. I didn't think they'd see me good there, or in a window, or real early in the mornings. I didn't want to hurt nobody. I didn't go by the river. I was afraid I'd get shot." Tater reached for the milk, and the other three at the table looked at each other as if they tried to unravel all this. "Tater, you did this to scare people? I don't understand." May coaxed information from him and genuinely tried to understand it all. "Yes, I thought I could make them not come. I could maybe buy this place if you lost money on it, or be a partner if no one came for a while. Maybe you'd let me be a part." Tater started to cry again now. He was so sad to have to bring all this up. He was ashamed of himself for sure. He only had Jeb and Skeet to talk to since old Bob died, and he felt like a dam had opened up now. "You are a part, Tater Daniels, a big part," May said. My daddy didn't trust me, though. He said so in his will. He trusted you and Mr. McGee, but not me." May sat back now and smiled a bit at the man. She was getting the idea here. "You settle down now, Tater. I understand now. No one was hurt, but you could have been. You just need to know you could have talked with us, so we could explain all this more." May patted his hand and added, "Tater, when we have more time, Chuck will sit down with you and explain more about all this. But you were trusted, as you put it, to us. But it was because your dad thought so much of you, and so do we. The trust the lawyer spoke of means a trust, money and land held for you, Tater. You are a partner here." Tater blinked through reddened eyes, and a slight glow of amazement replaced his sorrow. I am?" "Yes, Tater, hon." May patted his hand again. "You are a very important part of this place and a dear, dear friend. We have to focus on keeping things safe here tonight for now. We can talk more later. You stay close to Tom, okay?" Tater smiled, doing his best to settle all the words in the right places. His mind just spun now. "Eat your pie and stay here with us. There's trouble out there tonight, and we could use your help, okay? We can explain better later, but for now, we need everyone safe." Tater sat straight up and felt better being needed. May nodded to Greta and George to keep an eye on Tater, and George nodded back. May started to get up when George spoke up. "When did you last see Jeb today, Tater?" Tater thought, and at this point was way too scrambled to remember lies. "I took him to the backside trail behind the blue trail. He said he'd come to the garage, but he didn't come. I waited. I finished that big job, too. But he didn't show, and I got scared, and I left." May added, "When was that, Tater?" The big man answered with a mouthful of pie. It was this morning, early, after that big bang happened." "What was that? Did you all hear it too?" May answered, "We sure did. But I'll let George tell you about that. I'm going to check on Charles. Okay?" May got up, grabbed her shotgun, and walked down the hall toward Charles and his office, checking window locks and doors along the way. Greta asked Tater to describe the playground's events. There was something that just had her intuition up. The big man explained again all about the swings that swung on their own, the wind that screamed, and of course the eerie laughter of a young girl he couldn't see. Dear spirits, as plenty as the stars above, as bright as the moonlight is our love. Radiate our inner lights and protect us all that gather tonight. As we light the candle, may you bless this sacred space. Let its flame radiate love and protection from negativity. Put love in its place. With a bath of white light may it be cleansed and bring forth our guides, ancestors, and friends. Archangel Michael, defend us in battle and protect us from evil. May God rebuke it, we humbly pray. Amen. So may it be. Rose held the hands of her niece Carney, her nephew Will, and her husband Clay. They all spoke their hearts as they filled the room with their light and good intentions. They all had their own rituals they did before any investigation or communication from spirit, but this one they did together, every time. Rose held her pendulum out in front of her and steadied it straight with the other hand. The pink glow of the rose quartz pointed gemstone hung motionless. If you are with us, Spirit, can you show me your motion for yes? Slowly, the pendulum started to move and to make a circle movement. Small circles at first, then the pink point started to circle out wider and wider, around and around. Rose caught it with her free hand and steadied it straight again. Thank you, Spirit. Can you show me your no, please? Carney's hair began to stand up on her arms as if someone invisible was moving one of those static electricity plasma balls up her arms. She could feel the energy in the room intensify, and she shallowed her breathing and listened with her mind for any thoughts she could pick up now. The pendulum swung way out to the left and then back to the right and repeated it. Rose again thanked the spirit and steadied the pendulum to stillness. I recognize your energy. Could you be the man that came to us last time? The pendulum swung itself out way to the right and started to circle, like the old swing rides from the 1960s county fair. Round and round it flew into a pink blur, stretched to the chain's limit, and pulled from Rose's grip. The pendulum flew across the room and landed on the brown leather sofa. Carney jumped back in her chair, and Will snapped pictures in rapid succession. No one said a word. The room settled quiet again. Rose calmly laid her hands down on the table, palms up, and said, "Okay, let's try this your way." Rose almost immediately started receiving pictures and broken sentences in her mind. The medium did her best to gather the thoughts coming to her in waves now. A flash of a man in murky water drowning slowly. A stream of his blood raced above him and followed the water over the rocks. Bits and pieces flew through Rose's mind as she tried her best to slow them. Another quick flash of a struggle, a big man in fishing waders. She could not see his face. Blood seemed to soak his once white thermal long john shirt as a tall, thin man hit him over and over in the head with a rock. His face she saw, and she wished she didn't. The tall man hitting the other looked dirty and unkempt. His long, black, stringy hair hung in his face, a face that seemed to reveal his inner self. It looked almost like the face of a rat. His features were fading in and out from a human appearance and then changed to tightening into that of a huge rat with beady, sunken eyes. Then back again. Rose did not understand. The energy that came from this man was so dark it made her shudder. That scene pulled away in her mind and floated quickly to another, the big man under the water again, unconscious and fighting his last as his life essence left him. Rose startled as he flashed open one eye and seemed to look right at her in her mind's vision. The others in the room only saw Rose's body jump and kept their hold on each other's hands. Rose heard the man speak to her in a faraway tone. "Look up. Danger." His voice carried off as if it too was carried away on the water following his life's blood. Through the water she saw for herself something standing beyond the water, on the bank of the river, the ripples of the muddy water barely allowing its shape. Rose leaned in and focused. "Show me," she whispered aloud, and the water cleared enough to reveal a small girl in a dress, young, maybe 8, she questioned herself. The girl seemed also to look right at her, and smiled a sinister smile that sent a chill up Rose's spine. "This is no girl," she spoke to herself. She reached in deep to those who guided her and grabbed a bit more strength. "Show me!" Rose's voice came out strong and steady. The girl seemed to jump and twitch through the ripples of the water. "You reveal yourself to me." The vision of the girl waved in and out of focus, and all at once a black horror pushed its way to the surface, its claw-like hands reaching toward her in her mind. A black skull thing snaked out of the space where the girl once stood and stretched tall toward the trees. Its dark skin pulled across its bones as it moved. In one move it swept around and leaned over the bank of the river and the dead man's body and turned its face toward Rose's. It found her mind's eye with its own, then beamed at her with a red glare that was so piercing she lurched back in her seat. It opened its mouth in a screech that hurt her very core and revealed a mouthful of rows and rows of sharpened teeth. To Rose, its breath smelled like ancient death, and she squeezed the hands of Clay and Carney tight. Rose's chest got tight, and it felt as though something was squeezing her heart in its hand. It spoke only one thing in an echoey, snake-like hiss. "Tell them not to come," and blew a gust of air filled with its stench at Rose. Rose pulled back in her chair and held on tight. The others in the room saw her lurch backward, and it looked like a strong wind was about to blow her out of her chair. The vision left Rose as soon as it came, and all at once the wind stopped, and she tumbled forward against the table. She sat up and looked at Clay. I'm okay," she promised, reached up with one hand and fixed her hair away from her face, and grabbed Clay's hand again. Will sat unmoved beside them with a small recorder, a camera around his neck, and kept his eye on a video camera on the tripod next to him. Rose looked toward him, and he motioned with his eyes to Carney. Rose focused on her niece, who was having her own conversation with someone and seemed to be unaware of Rose's experience. She sincerely hoped it was not the thing on the riverbank. Carney spoke out in low, even tones. "Please come speak to us and tell us what you need us to know. You are not at rest. How can we help you?" Will watched the small recorder in the room around him. Carney always gave a long pause between questions so as not to speak over anything that may come over the recorder. Will knew this and waited, then checked the tape. Carney's voice came through loud and clear, and then silence. Carney sat with her eyes closed and concentrated, then tried again and repeated the question. "Is there anything you wish to tell us? Can we help in some way?" "We are here to help." They waited, and Will rewound the tape. The tape played back, and one word came through from an unseen source. "Danger," and a small child's laughter. Sheriff Cook was already on his way up the winding road toward the cabins. Someone had called into the station and reported hearing a blood-curdling scream coming from by the garage. Bill Cook had Nan call up there, and no one answered. The sheriff was already on high alert because of Hell Night and all it brought with it. But there was something else in the air. He just knew a special kind of trouble was brewing. Sheriff Bill Cook hadn't even made it back to the station from this morning's event. If he was going back up there, he wasn't going without a special kind of backup. He had met his dear friend Gray Cloud, and both Crow and old Jake were with him when he showed up at the turn to the mountain road. They too had felt warning in the wind, Crow had said. "Well, my friends, let's hope we can catch it before it gets too out of hand." Cook placed a roadblock with a few men at the first hard curve on the road before the garage, and left hard orders for no one to pass either way before letting him know first. He was going to get to the bottom of this mess before it got worse. It was already bad, and he could actually feel it. Cook rode with Bubba the rest of the way up the mountain. Poor Bubba was tired, but asked to see it through with him tonight. Sheriff Bill felt Bubba knowing was enough and didn't want to get any new eyes on whatever awaited them further up, and Bubba was a trusted friend too. That meant a lot on a night like this. Gray Wolf sat next to Crow as he drove his old Ford. A turkey feather hung from its rearview mirror, and it swayed to Crow, singing a prayer song as he took the turns. Jake sat in the back and chanted his spirit song. His mind was already in battle with the energies that lay in wait. Gray Wolf watched the tree line as they rode and whispered, "Great Spirit, be with us tonight." Chuck was just hanging up the phone when May walked in. "Bill and Bubba are both on their way up. They have Gray Wolf, Crow, and Jake with them," Chuck said to her as she sat down in the big chair across from him, shotgun on her lap. May let out a sigh of relief. Whew. That sure puts me calmer, Charles. It's going to take us all tonight, I believe. I can feel it. You? Sure can. And then some. You keep that near you at all times. Chuck pointed the shotgun in her lap and continued. Don't hesitate one bit, not one bit. You hear me? Concern washed over his face now, and she reassured him. I promise, Charles. We will get it set right. Something awful has got everything stirred up. She smiled at her husband. They had seen so much here over the years, and now she hoped her words would hold true. Well, stirred up or not, you shoot to kill. Hear me? I know how you feel about these beings out here. I understand. But all said and done, they're wild. Remember that. There's something in the air, May. Something foul. It's just way off. May looked down and nodded. She knew too. Chuck stood up, looked out the window, the full moon just peeking through the trees. You know what happens, May. Hell! He slapped his leg. Those mean ones are going to come through if the regulars out here keep wailing like this. It's going to get ugly fast. I don't like them at all, May. They are more like warriors, protectors of those others. Those howls coming from down the mountain, if it's what I saw, what Greta and... Oh, Lord, I can't believe I'm saying this. Bob's ghost warned us of. We have got ourselves a hell of a night ahead, a hell of a night. And dang, if it ain't a full moon. We will get through it, Charles. Help's coming. May got up now, walked toward Chuck, somehow looking out of kilter in her apron, pretty house dress and calico, and a shotgun at her side. But no doubt a pillar of strength to her husband of so many years. She placed a hand on Chuck's shoulder. We are all ready to go in here. I will get you a fresh thermos and send the boys in when they get here for coffee if they need. If those scary ones come through, Chuck, she added with concern, let Jake handle it. They scare me too. Chuck nodded, and they both made their way to their posts for the evening. Sheriff Cook noticed a small stream of smoke coming from the back of the garage as they rounded the curve in the road. Fire, Danker! What next? He grabbed up the radio mic and started to call it in, when a closer look made him hold a moment. It looked like it was in the junkyard and not at the building at all. Bubba turned into the Perkins garage. The sound of gravel almost startled both of the lawmen out of their thoughts. Roll quiet, Bubba. No telling what the hell's going on here. Bill Cook put the mic receiver back on the hook, and Sheriff Cook pulled down the brim of his hat and readied himself. Crow pulled in right behind them and rolled to a stop. Jake was the first one out of the truck, never even closing the door on the Ford's King cab. He just walked silently toward the building and almost seemed to do all of it with his eyes closed, hands splayed outward to his side, as if he to feel the air as he moved. Crow and Grey Wolf followed close behind him, their eyes more on the tree line and the building. Grey Wolf had a tanned leather bag in his hands and sprinkled something from it as he walked. Crow had a turtle rattle in one hand, and he lightly shook it as they walked and chanted almost in a whisper as they did. These were the weapons of war, tried and true. Cook and Danker left their doors ajar too, both with their versions of weapons of war, the car's fire extinguisher, flashlights, and high-powered rifles. The group walked slowly. Cook held up his hand for Jake and his group to hold there, then to Bubba to go around to the left, and Bill took the right of the building, looking in the side window as he did, to a bare light bulb hanging from the lift that lit an empty lift bay. He shined in the flashlight's beams and saw nothing inside but Jeb's toolbox and an empty garage. He watched as Bubba disappeared around a corner, and he continued around his. The junk cars and equipment were lit mostly by the moon, and an old spotlight off the back door that threw shadows among the rusted hulls of cars and pickups that had rode their last. Bill Cook focused on the stream of black smoke as he eased his way around the junkers and tall weeds. Bubba's flashlight beam came into view, and Bill waited to catch Deputy Danker's attention, and then nodded toward what looked like a brush fire that had almost put itself out when it had crawled its way to the sand of the playground's fence. Bubba quick pulled the pin on his second extinguisher of that day and pulled out what little was left of the embers there. Sheriff Cook sniffed the air and asked, "Do you smell gas, Bubba?" and showed his beam to the blackened spot at their feet. "Sure do," Bubba answered. "And look here." He moved his flashlight along the burned trail. "That look like blood to you?" Cook bent down and touched at the grass, and a thick red spread over his fingers as he pulled it away. He spread across it with his thumb. "Damned if it isn't, Bubba. We got us another crime scene here." He stood up, and they both surveyed their surroundings with their lights and barrels of their weapons, both looking into nearby beds of trucks and under vehicles. "There's more. Look here, Sheriff." Bubba pointed to a tailgate of an old faded red Chevy truck. The blood glinted bright red along its side. "Hell, Bubba, that's a lot of blood." He moved up closer. "That's gotta be an arterial gush. Shh. Angle of impact shows it had to be coming from, well..." He stopped, stood up, stepped back, and held his hand above his head. "Oh, hell, Bubba, higher than me." They both looked up to nothing there. No tree, or anyway someone that tall lost an arm or a leg. Bill tipped his hat back and scratched his chin. "Where's the damn body, Deputy? That much blood? Some bitch didn't walk away." Bubba looked around. "The blood stops here, Sheriff," and pointed at the sand. Shined his light through the fence and picked up drag marks starting about 10 feet into the playground. They both looked at each other and walked up to get a closer look. They followed the drag impressions with their lights. There was more blood further away, and something else. "What the hell?" Sheriff Cook whispered as he focused on a huge imprint about 10 feet in from the fence. "What in the actual hell is that, Danker?" Bubba focused in now, too, on what looked like a wolf track. "You seeing what I'm seeing, Deputy?" Bubba did. He didn't believe it, but he saw it. I do, Sheriff. If that's a wolf track, damn thing is huge." "That's putting it mildly, Bubba. Damn thing would have to be as big as you." Bubba hated it, but he shuddered at this, because he knew the sheriff was right. You think a wolf did this, Sheriff?" The sheriff shined his light beam as far as it would reach, past the old rickety merry-go-round, the one they found that woman spinning around on a couple years back, past the swings that he was often told swung on their own, when there was no wind at all, and almost to the other side where the shadows ended and where he himself felt hell began. Off where Jake and Crow had told him that the soil was sour, and the big man felt a chill run down his spine as cold as a demon's touch. I tell you, Deputy, I sure don't know. What I do know is there is no way we are going up there now. If this is human blood, they are good and dead. It may have been an animal fight. I just can't tell. Can't explain this fire at all. Gas spill? What set it off? I have no clue. I can also add we aren't going through there alone right now. We need to get up to Chuck and see if he's heard anything. Make sure everyone there is all right. We will call the boys up here, get them to rope this off, and see what's next. Get this scene analyzed and go from there. Bubba shook his head and much happier than he'd like to admit, because he sure didn't want to go into that playground or those woods. "All right, I will call it in then." "Sheriff!" A voice, low and strong, came from behind them, and both lawmen jumped just a bit. Bill Cook turned around to see Jake squatted down next to the truck and saw him point to just under the tailgate. Bubba showed his beam in that direction, and the light caught a bit of gold metal. Bill Cook walked over with his light and kneeled down, pulled out a Ziploc bag from his pocket, covered his hand, and reached for the object. He pulled it to the light, an open Zippo lighter covered in soot. He saw what looked like engraving under it. With a plastic-covered thumb, he rubbed across the letters there and spoke them aloud. "EEP. "Ezra?" he whispered. Bill looked at Bubba, who was right next to him now. "Didn't Jeb carry this lighter, Bubba?" "I think so, Sheriff. Smoked those hand-rolled buglers, he did." Sheriff looked around on the ground to see if there were any butts around. "Nothing," he stated, and clicked the lighter closed in the plastic bag, zipped it shut, and put it in his pocket. "You think this was an animal, Jake?" He looked up toward Jake as he spoke, but Jake wasn't there. He was already at the fence, looking out at the playground and beyond. The men walked over to Jake, careful not to step on any evidence. "Jake," Bill repeated, "do you think this was an animal attack here? Those blood splatters look like—" Bill was cut off there by the soft, strong voice coming from Jake now. "This was no animal attack, Bill. What we have here is so much more. That man is dead. If you find his body, there won't be much left. You will find it in a tree nearby, probably, as a warning, if it isn't eaten completely." Bubba swallowed hard at this, and a quiet "what?" slipped out of his mouth. "Oh yes, my friend," Jake added, and pointed at the track print in the sand. "This is a werewolf, one from far away from his home. There are probably several. They travel in packs. If they are from where I am thinking, over many miles. They would not do this alone." Sheriff Cook took off his hat and first looked down at the print and then out at the woods beyond. "What else are you getting, Jake?" Bill asked quietly. "Nature will fight for territory tonight. Spirits are restless and angry here. And our fight not only lies beyond those trees, but here, on this ground. There will be more who come to help. It is their path, their journey. It will be a fight of good and evil. And Bill, my friend, I know not who will win." Bubba gulped now. "Jake, are you really saying a werewolf did this? Like those old movies?" Bubba moved his light beam again at the track and around the woods and back again. Jake smiled, teasing now. "No, my friend, that is a myth. This is real. It is a rougarou. Moved from its territory by a bad storm, Katrina is possible. It fought its way along the deep woods and mountains, slowly making its way to new ground, killing along the way for food and shelter. They would have to be cunning to make it this far unnoticed." A wailing sound echoed down to the men from higher up the mountain. Bubba gulped again and shuddered, and Jake finished. But do not worry. That one is not our fight tonight. That fight belongs to them," and pointed toward the sound and slapped Bubba on the back, smiling. "Come on, Sheriff," he said, as he walked toward the garage, stepping over the burned places. "There is more to do. Leave this to your men." Sheriff took one more look at the woods. "What fresh hell is this?" he whispered, and they all walked up to the back of the building. Gray Cloud and Crow were there, looking at Jeb's old Chevy and the claw marks there. Crow said something in Cherokee to Jake, and Jake nodded in agreement. The only word the sheriff recognized was Rougarou. "Yes, I agree. The driver of this truck insulted the beast or hurt another in its pack." Sheriff Cook jumped in now. "Are you saying something slashed up Jeb's truck for revenge?" Crow smiled now. It always made him smile to see someone try so hard to understand some things that were just so, well, simple. Yes, this creature would not have come from hiding to do such things, unless to protect his pack, or it was challenged in some way. Animals are simple creatures. They kill for food, yes, but these are different. They know not to show themselves. It means death to their whole pack, possible extinction of their kind. This was no warning. This was an attack. It was mad. "What?" Bubba asked, trying to understand. "It was pissed," Jake added to the conversation. "Those scratch marks are deep from something very large, taller than you, Deputy Danker. Also black in color." Crow pulled out a deer antler knife from his boot and dug something from one of the deep scratches. It looked like a bit of black fur, and held it in view of the others. Bubba cringed at the sight of it. Crow added, "There are also 2 empty mason jars on the passenger floor that smell of alcohol, a loaded Taurus 357 under the seat, and 47 cents on the dashboard." He handed the fur to Bubba, who stuck it into a Ziploc bag from his pocket and handed it to the sheriff, who held it to the moonlight, looked at it closer, and quickly stuck it in his pocket. "Geez, Crow, you can tell all that from just touching that?" Bubba was amazed. "No, Deputy." "Then how, Crow?" Bubba pressed on. Crow smiled at his friend. "I looked in the truck." Jake smiled and shook his head a bit and added, "Whose truck is this?" "Jebediah Perkins. He runs this garage," Bill answered. "And that's his lighter in your pocket?" Jake asked. Grey Wolf and Crow listened intently as the sheriff answered, "Sure is. I saw this truck this afternoon when I came to talk to Tater Daniels. I had hoped it was a bear." "That's one big bear for these parts, Bill. Do you not think so?" Grey Wolf teased his friend. "Well, boys, to be honest, I don't know what to believe right now," and juggled a flashlight and rifle in his hands to be able to wipe significant sweat off his brow and readjust his hat. "I can tell you what I believe, my friend," Jake stated. "This was the beginning," he pointed at the truck, "and that was the finish." He pointed at the burned area with all the blood by the fence. "Jebediah did something, discovered a nest, and confronted them, something to make one of them come out of hiding to seek revenge. Now they will move further up to find new ground. The energy of the fear and pain has fed something else here, I feel it. Something ancient, made it stronger, and here we are, stuck in the middle." Grey Wolf sprinkled some of the contents of his bag at their feet and added, "We have work further up the road. I suggest we move on," and started to walk around the building to the truck, and the others followed. Bill Cook asked the air a one-word question. Ancient? He shook it off, not wanting to dig deeper just yet. Bubba, I will call this in. You check that front door and make sure it's secure. Bubba called back. All right, Sheriff. And he moved faster up ahead next to Grey Wolf and Jake. If this is a werewolf, do we need silver bullets? Grey Wolf looked at Jake and they smiled. No, my friend, you need this, and handed him his leather bag. Bubba took it and looked at the dried silvery substance inside and sniffed at the contents. Woo-wee, that stinks, he said and pulled back from the bag and a quick handed it back to Grey Wolf. What is that stuff? Wormwood, Grey Wolf smiled, and he and Jake laughed. It wards off werewolves. It does? Bubba asked, surprised. To a point, Crow offered now, walking with them. Is that all you need? The deputy continued. Crow looked thoughtfully at his younger friend. No, you need faith, a good heart, and sometimes one of these. He tapped Bubba's rifle and smiled. Crow, Jake, and Grey Wolf spoke at their truck and waited for Bubba to check the door, and for another set of sheriff's men to come up the road and take over so they could move on and see Chuck and May at the cabins. Sheriff leaned on the roof of his vehicle and finished his instructions. That's right, just the two of you and the medical examiner for now. Rope this off and get back down to the roadblock. This is a shit show already, and we need to keep a tight lock on things. If anyone asks, possible bear attack or cougar. Sheriff knew no one seeing this would buy that, but Bill Cook hoped it would keep people inside and safe for now, and buy some time. I want Jim Bruce and a Stady over at the RV park to pull an all-nighter. Tell them stay together, keep an eye out, and check in with me every half hour. You understand? Sheriff listened as the deputy repeated his orders. Sweat rolled down his nose, and he wiped it away, took off his hat, and laid it on the roof of his car. As the deputy finished repeating his wishes, he took out a handkerchief from his pocket and ran it over his forehead and watched Bubba checking on the last window of the garage. Yup, he added into the mic. All tight here, as tight as can be anyway, and dang if it isn't a hot night for the end of October. Bubba overheard and added with a smile, It's Indian summer, Sheriff. Crow looked over and said, What's that, deputy? Bubba felt caught in something. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. They all laughed, and Crow added, It's okay. Just a bit of fun, my friend. And Bubba laughed too. Okay, son. Keep your head on the swivel. You hear me? Over. Bill smiled at the laughter as he reached in and hung the mic back up on its holder on the dashboard. Bill looked over at Bubba. Hey, Bubba, here. And Bill Cook reached in his pocket, pulled out a fold of bills, peeled off a 5 and some 1s, and held it out toward Bubba. They're just messing with you, son, and smiled. Toss this in the coffee can and grab us all a cola, will you? And nodded toward the Pepsi machine on the porch. Bubba took the money and said, Sure, Sheriff. And make mine a root beer, will you? Bubba nodded and made his way back up the porch. Bill Cook added, You fellas want a cola? I'm buying. Crow said, I do not. Thank you, though. Grey Wolf held up a hand and shook his head no, as did Jake. Oh, I forgot, my friends. Fasting? Jake nodded. Ceremony started for us days ago, Sheriff. All at once, Bill Cook remembered the battle they had ahead of them and did his best to keep spirits up. Well, okay then, Bubba. Just you and me, then. Make mine 2 root beers if they're in there. He called up to Bubba. The deputy didn't answer. Bubba, is there 2 in there? Bill Cook waited for an answer. None came. He looked at the deputy, who seemed to be staring into the Pepsi cooler, and he thought he was taking in the cooler air as he did as a kid. Bubba, did you hear me? We gotta go now. Boys are almost here. Bubba just stood there, his back to the sheriff, his rifle in one hand, and holding up the lid to the cooler with the other. Bill mindlessly grabbed his hat and walked toward Bubba up on the porch. Bubba, come on now. I know the air is cool, but... Bill stopped in mid-sentence. A thought ran across his mind. This all might be way too much on his deputy. And he quickened his step a bit. Bubba, you all right? Sheriff's words were cut off by Bubba speaking now in low, methodic tones. Sheriff, I found Jeb. What? Asked Sheriff Cook. He quickly reached Bubba and slid the rifle from his deputy's hand without even thinking, and grabbed the lid with the other, lifted it, and looked in. There, resting on the Mountain Dews, cherry colas, and Stewart root beer, was Jebediah Perkins's head staring back at Sheriff Cook. His face was frozen in an eternal scream, and his life's blood puddled among the bottles of pop. Bill Cook shuddered and slammed down the lid and grabbed Bubba. Okay, son, let's get in the car. He moved the big man along as he spoke. Jake, it's Jeb's head, Cook said, and he nodded toward the cooler as he helped Bubba maneuver the stairs. Jake, Gray Cloud, and Crow moved forward to help. Crow helped Bubba to the car, and the sheriff went with the other men, lifted the lid with his handkerchief, and Jake looked in and said, I say, that fits this creature, Bill. Grey Wolf agreed and offered, It's a warning. Must have been watching. Saw people here, using this box. To him, it is an it's done. Do not come after me. Bill Cook pushed up his hat, wiped his forehead, and asked, This thing that smart, Grey Wolf? Smarter, Jake answered. Sheriff Cook closed the lid as Unit Number 5 rolled up. He looked at Jake. Are we, Jake? He paused. Going after him, I mean. Jake smiled at his friend. Bill, I do not think we will have to. Bill Cook nodded and walked over to fill in the new deputies, get them to start with the front porch, the Pepsi cooler, and poor Jeb's head. When he finished there, he got in to drive Bubba this time. Bubba, are you okay? Bill asked, and Bubba answered. I'm shook for sure. No lie there. But I'm good to go, Sheriff. Let's finish this. Let's do just that, Deputy, Bill answered. Let's do just that. And they headed up the mountain with Crow, Grey Wolf, and Jake following close behind. Rose leaned in toward her niece now, forgetting for a moment of the drowning man and the thing that was no little girl on the riverbank. What danger? She spoke at Carney, but more through her now. Can you tell us more? How can we help you? Will held the recorder close to Carney, and Rose gave him a whispered command. Let it run. Will laid it down on the table and stood up, clicking softly, picture after picture, around the room. Rose continued. Can we help you? If we can, how? Carney coughed a bit, and her face winced and steadied. She started to speak in a low, gruffled tone. I can't leave. Must have my Susan. Death comes wanting tonight. So much danger. Not children. Not safe. The collector keeps them. The collector cannot have me, cannot, must fight. Susan, my love, my Susan, danger, tell them. Carney's head fell back and the atmosphere changed. Rose patted her niece's hand and spoke low. Carney girl, come on out. Come on out of it now. Come on back. Carney's eyelashes fluttered as she focused on her aunt. What did I say? Did he answer? He sure did. Got it all right here on video, too. Will answered excitedly and hurried to the video camera and noticed its orange battery indicator. Oh, man, the battery is dead, Will announced. Uncle Clay, check the recorder, he called over, disappointment in his voice. Clay reached for the recorder and confirmed that it, too, had 0 battery left. Every time. Will shook his head and Carney giggled at her being right. All of the last minute's events momentarily forgotten. Right now, she was just a younger sister. Okay, Carney, Will gave in. At least I got some of it and some pictures, maybe. Will sat down to go over the shots he took with his camera, and Uncle Clay and Aunt Rose filled in Carney on what came through her. Rose did her best to explain what she had seen in her vision, that there was something strong that portrayed itself as a small girl. Carney had her own details on that, too. There are other kids, though, real ones. I mean, dead, of course, but still kids. I can't explain it, but they need help. Rose assured her they would do their best, but she would feel better if they had some help. It's very strong, Carney. She left out a bit of the details of the black skull thing for now, but felt like she needed Carney to understand. It took everything my guides had to protect me tonight. Carney wrinkled her nose a bit and added her own thoughts. I get it, Auntie. I get it. But they need us. You aren't one to back away from a fight. Rose loved her spunk, but it also worried her. Carney girl, no one is backing away, just stepping back. There is so much going on here right now, and more coming, I feel. We just need to get our bearings and a little help. Rose reached for her niece's hand again and squeezed it. We will do what we can. We were guided here for a reason. Those that brought us will find a way. Carney squeezed back. She knew her aunt was right, but she had zero intention of backing off. No how, no way. Okay, how about this guy? The one who spoke through me? Rose leaned back in her chair and thought. I feel he is anchored here somehow, to someone or something. I feel he was murdered close by, but he seems more focused on whatever danger is coming than his own demise. There's something else. He is protected by something strong, good energy, full of light. Carney leaned in closer and spoke almost in a whisper. Susan! Could be, Uncle Clay spoke up. If it's one thing I've learned, love is the strongest energy out there. He added a smile toward Rose, and it was returned. Rose added, Agreed. He seems so very focused on her, and it is possible their love could block that kind of darkness. I feel you are correct. Will spoke up, still going over the many pictures he had captured tonight. Anything in history here on Suzanne, Uncle Clay? Yes, there was about 10 years or so back. Seems she lived down the mountain road a bit. Married to a Robert, I believe. We can ask the McGees when we talk to them. See if it makes any sense. I'm sure you two are exhausted. How about a cool drink and a stroll down to the McGee's fire pit? I'll bet he's down there. It's still early. Sounds lovely, and it feels right somehow, Rose answered. Well, we will do it then. You bring your protection. And he smiled as he stood up. And I will bring mine. He tapped the gun in his holster under his shirt. All this talk of danger, I'm not leaving without it. Rose smiled and started to answer, but was cut off by Will jumping up. I got something! Look! The young man jumped up and ran to the others, holding out his camera toward them. They all pulled in close to see, and there, in his preview window, was a picture of them at the table, lit by candlelight. Carney seemed to be in mid-channeling, and behind her, near the wall, was a tall white glow, with a definite figure of a woman within it. You could see she was wearing a check shirt, and possibly jeans. A long ponytail of dark hair tumbled over her shoulder that ran down her left side, and she was most definitely smiling. Rose held her hand over the picture and closed her eyes. Yes, this is her. This is Susan. Rage barked a hello to Chuck and George as the trio rounded the lodge and caught sight of the two at the fire pit. Chuck leaned forward with his shotgun pointed till Joe and Dave came into view. Anything? Chuck asked. Everyone looks quiet in their cabins, Deputy Joe Parker answered. Good, George added, and they all took seats around the fire. Rage made his rounds of hellos and got a good scratch behind the ears from George. You sensed anything out here, boy? He asked the dog as matter of fact as it could be. Rage seemed to look up at the night sky and sniff the air. A slow rumble came from his throat, and he looked toward Dave. Something on the wind, boy? You stay here, close, till we know what it is. Dave gave a hand gesture, and Rage moved in close to his side and sat down, looked toward the trees behind them, and softly rumbled another growl. Chuck nodded and said, He knows too, Dave. I cannot stress enough. Lock and load. Everyone has a good vantage point from here. Just keep your eyes peeled. Joe answered him. What are we looking for, Chuck? Exactly? Dave raised an eyebrow and added his question. Bigfoots? Chuck leaned back in his chair and scanned the treetops with his eyes and answered back. Probably not. Whatever the Squatch is pissed at, I'd imagine. Dave and Joe both leaned back in their chairs and started looking at their view of the top of the trees and surrounding dark woods. There's a 1,000-foot drop-off behind here. That rock wall behind me drops down to the falls below. Be a hard climb for anything, I'd imagine. But these woods in front of me, well, it could come from anywhere. If it's coming, Chuck explained. Joe checked his weapons again and looked at Dave. Dave shrugged his shoulders and quick checked his, and noticed the headlights of a vehicle peeking in and out of the trees. Someone's coming. They all looked in the direction of his gaze, and Chuck stood up to get a better look. Lord, let it be Jake and the sheriff. He got his wish as the vehicle rounded the turn in the road, and Dave noticed there was a truck close behind. Gentlemen, Chuck smiled, the cavalry has arrived. Took off his hat and silently said, Thank you, Lord. Introductions went around the fire. Hands were shook, and thank you all for coming echoed throughout. Rage was greeted by all the newcomers, and the dog took an extra liking to Jake and Crow. This one, he knows things, Jake said, and nodded to Dave. Sheriff broke the news of Jeb's horrible ending to the men. Must have been the screaming we heard, Chuck added in. Jesus, what a way for him to go. Well, that's two today. Both of those boys were rotten to the core. But no one deserves that. Bubba, remembering Jeb's head, staring up at him, sat down near Chuck's chair and took a moment to gather himself. Jake walked to the rock wall while Crow spoke of the conclusions they had come to and the fight ahead.